Okay, welcome to online teaching for our Women in Crime class. What we're going to have here is, I'm going to talk slowly first of all, and I'm just learning this here. This is all new to me, so I appreciate your patience. You know, my second class I'm doing, I just did my first victimology class. I'm hoping that one came out well. But anyways, a couple of things I want to talk to you about the female juvenile delinquency. One of the things is we'll have lecture, and then the first quiz is going to be the Thursday. So the week you come back to school, I say the week you come back to virtual school, it'll be that Thursday, but it'll be on Moodle. But I'm going to be going over the lecture here, and then you can take the quiz after. So let's get started. Let's talk about how the court system developed with juvenile court to begin with. For one thing, we had the parens patriae. What parens patriae actually means is the government is acting as the parent. And what happened was a lot of children, let me rephrase this. A lot of parents lost complete control of their children, and they couldn't handle things themselves, so they asked the court to intervene. So the courts would act in the best interest of the child. In other words, they're taking the role of the parent, and they decide the consequences of the children. It was beneficial for parents who didn't have control over their children, but the negative of it, some people would say that with parens patriae, that parents no longer had the final say what would happen with their kids. Other movements with the juvenile justice system was the child saving movement, the age of consent campaign, and basically what we're talking about here is the child saving movement was people that thought the children weren't being raised the right way. They were taken into court or placed into housing or placed in orphanages or placed someplace in the best interest of the child. And the fact is, a lot of these kids didn't even have to commit crimes in order to be taken out of their houses. And that was the whole idea of saving the child. The age of consent campaign. This was the whole idea. We have the age of consent laws now. Well, it all developed under the age of consent campaign. Protect girls from men who preyed on their innocence. So we wanted to create laws to protect them. But unfortunately, the laws used to punish the girls for their sexuality instead of going after the offender. As it says, the moral conditions stem from white women who's concerned about the white girls. Now, have you noticed that I'm specifying the race here? Because there's the issue of the purity of the white girls, and that's why we want to protect the white girls from abusive men. There's very little discussion about girls of color. The term net widening. Because the criminal justice system puts more effort into protecting girls than they do boys, a lot of girls would be placed into the criminal justice system for minor offenses, and the idea of protecting them compared to that of boys. So one of the questions you're going to be asked is, what is considered net widening? And net widening is using the court system as more of a net, as the term implies, to go over kids and get the girls particularly under the protection of the criminal justice system. So a lot of girls were being placed under the criminal justice system on the protection of net widening. I thought you'd like this picture here. I'll tell you, this is tough for me doing this without talking to the class here because you know my style of teaching is to put people on the spot and things like that, but I can't do that with this format. So I'm hoping we'll be back to a traditional classroom, but again, I'm going to do the best I can with the cards that have been dealt to us. But net widening, like it says, refers to the practice whereby programs such as diversion were developed to inhibit the introduction of youth into the justice system, juvenile justice system. In other words, we kept on giving reasons to deal with juveniles and put these juveniles in the court system for whatever reason, so we have keeping a better eye on them. And this happened more with girls than it did with boys. But just gives you an example of the age of consent laws. The history of it is pretty bizarre when you look at the age of consent. Before we had before people started focusing on protecting the children, you could see the average age was between 10 and 12 under most states. Now we have both states raised to 16, if not 18. Now Virginia has an unusual law of age of consent. Virginia it's illegal to have sex with someone under the age of 18 unless you have extenuating circumstances like Romeo and Juliet laws, and even then they may not make it legal, but they might not classify it as a sex offense depending on the situation. But again, this is the age of consent laws, how they were created and how they apply today. But if you notice that the age of consent laws in today's in the country as it is today, they would keep on making more and more exceptions on allowing kids to have sex under the age of 18. But again, the age of consent campaigners, when they were trying to protect the girls, it was more of like it found the girls more dangerous than their male counterparts. So if a boy was engaging in sex under the age, it wasn't as big of a deal. Do those attitudes still apply today? I think so. Is there not a double standard in our society where it's okay for boys to have sex, it's cool for boys to have sex, but we think differently of girls to have sex? It's more dangerous for them and we gotta protect them. So what happened in some of these campaigns was we actually would put juvenile girls into reformatories to shift their sexual desires and train them to be young women for marriage. So it's pretty bizarre how they treated women in the past, or girls in the past rather, and there's like a double standard for girls versus boys as far as sexual activity, and we wanted to make sure that girls would be more moral and properly make them ready for marriage. And this was just another example of the criminal justice system protecting girls for sexual acts as a part of net widening and getting them more in the system. And there's just some information on the laws here for on the age of consent. Girls arrested for status offense were forced to have gynecological exams. Think about that. Think about having an exam forced on you to see if you're a virgin or not. Do you think there were double standards then? Some of these double standards still apply today. But think of the idea of having a gynecological exam put on you just to see if you're a virgin. Double victimization by far. First the assault itself, and then being placed in the system to make sure you're sexually pure. Girls sanctioned not only for consensual sex but also for tempting defendants into more immoral behaviors. So girls, if they were acting promiscuous or leading boys down astray, they could face consequences against them. There was definitely a different treatment of girls versus boys when it comes to sexual activities. And that same double standard still applies today. Just think about the attitudes of an older guy having sex with a girl versus an older woman having sex with a boy. How many people think, oh, that boy, what a lucky guy he is? but we treat girls completely differently. We want to protect them. We're going to protect girls and put them in the system, make sure they're sexually pure. You'll see this on a test, so make sure you know this. The fastest growing population within the juvenile justice system is girls. They're getting into the system a lot faster than the boys are right now. But keep in mind that the girls continue to represent only a small proportion of all cases. Boys still commit the majority of delinquent acts, but girls are still committing them at a faster pace. You can click on that link if you want. It will just show the different data on how many boys are being arrested for certain offenses versus girls. There's also a difference when it comes to race. As it says there, minority youth account for more than half of all juvenile arrests for murder and robbery, 45% of burglary arrests, and 40% of larceny theft arrests. Now think about this here. Is the issue whether minorities are committing more crimes or they're being targeted? The same thing when you talk about adult criminal acts. Minorities some minorities commit a disproportionate amount of criminal acts. Is it because they're committing more acts or they're being caught more? Same thing can apply to minorities, whether they're committing more acts or they're being caught more. But the bottom line is that a disproportionate amount of minority youths are being arrested for offenses. And it's just because this is pretty updated here. Is most recent data I can get. The OJJDP is the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. It's a great resource site if you want to use that for any kind of research involving juveniles. But just look at what it shows here about the covering girls' involvement in the juvenile justice system and being placed into residential treatment. Even though girls are involved at a faster pace than boys right now, look what happened from 2006 to 2015. The arrest of juvenile girls went down by 50%. Make sure you know this. Since 2006, the arrest of girls has gone down by 50%. And just more data here, like I said, I'm just going to read this to you. In 2015, law enforcement agencies in the United States made an estimated 929,000 plus arrests of persons under the age of 18. Girls accounted for 269,000 of them. So less than 1/3 of the offenses. So again, the stats are clearly there that even though girls are getting involved more at a faster pace, boys still commit the majority of delinquent acts. Are girls becoming more violent now? Well, you look watching these YouTube videos, you see girls acting, and it gets a lot of attention because it's out of the norm, right? Sugar and spice and everything nice. When girls do get in acts of violence, a lot of them have to do with issues involving their parents. When girls try to go out, parents block the door because they don't want them out because they're protecting their child, their girl from going out. And remember, parents seem to be more protective of girls, and boys more likely to have more freedom. But when girls don't get that freedom, they resist and they try to leave. The parents try to block them from going out. A lot of assaults occur just under that format. And this is just saying what I just got through talking about here. Parents trying to exert their parental authority, physical control, with physical resistance from the daughter, and therefore they call the police. It's no longer referred to as family conflicts now or domestic abuse, or there as assaults. They refer to as assaults. The girls get treated as an assault perpetrator and are brought into the criminal justice system. Why are they more likely to get into the more likely system here? Well, the issue of gender norms. If a girl is being aggressive, we have to keep her under control. That's the thought of the criminal justice process. So they might be more greater risk for arrest. Girls, make sure you know this is here as well. Girls fight with family members or siblings more frequently than boys, whereas boys are more likely to fight with acquaintances or strangers out in the street. But girls are more likely to get involved with family conflicts, physical family conflicts with their family, compared to that of boys. The irony of a double standard with the use of force. Parents use physical force on a child. It can be considered corporal punishment. It'd have to be a pretty significant act for it to be deemed physical abuse. But it can be subjective. There's no subjectivity, though, however, when a child uses physical force on a parent. It's now a delinquent act and it can be charged with a crime. I'd ask you questions so far, but there's no one in my classroom, so there's a different format for sure, and like I said, we're all trying to get used to this here. And I'm just going to read this last section here. Regardless of who initiates a violent domestic incident, it is more practical and efficient for police to identify the youth as the offender when the parent is the caretaker for the child in the home. So sometimes there's a lot. We automatically think of the child as being the guilty one instead of just defending themselves from physical abuse. As I said before, remember this here, the girls are the fastest growing population. But again, they commit a small portion compared to that of boys. Boys are arrested more often than their female juvenile counterparts. The rates of arrest for girls has increased at a faster rate compared to boys over the past 3 decades. But remember what I said since 2006, that the arrest of female perpetrators has gone down by 50%. Much of the media attention throughout the past decade has been fixated on the levels of violence and aggression among adolescent girls. Why? Because it's out of the norm. There's an assumption that boys can be aggressive and violent. As a matter of fact, do we not even encourage boys to be aggressive at some points? Play with soldiers and things like that, and fighting games. But girls are expected to be mild and meek. And when they don't act out of those traditional norms that we think they're supposed to be in, it garnishes a lot more attention. A lot of YouTube videos, things like that. You can play this video if you want. It's just showing of how violent girls can be, and a brawl that happened at a McDonald's, I believe. So let's talk about the legislation. The 1974 Juvenile Justice Delinquency and Prevention Act called for discrimination of status offenders. What does that mean? What is a status offense, first of all? A status offense is an offense that only is illegal because it's committed by juveniles. In other words, a runaway. If an adult decides, I don't want to live here anymore, and they run away, there's nothing illegal about that. But if a juvenile runs away, they're considered a status offense. Juveniles have to go to school. Adults don't have to go to school. An adult can be incorrigible and you get a divorce. A child's incorrigible, you can take him to court for being an unruly child. Truancy, possession of alcohol, these are all status offenses, and they're only an offense because the child's of an age. But all these offenses we talked about when we created the 1974 Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Act for the decriminalization of status offenders, what they're saying is it's no longer a crime. So therefore, you cannot lock up, you can't put someone in jail for running away. You can't put someone in jail for skipping school. Can there be consequences? Yes, but it's not a criminal act, so your consequences are rather limited. This was particularly Because remember I said we try to protect girls? How many girls were getting locked up beforehand for running away? We want to keep them safe because we're protecting the girls. So a lot of girls were getting arrested for just running away from home. So this Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act was beneficial for both genders, but it particularly helped a lot of girls from not being locked up for status offenses. The practice of probation violations circumvented placement of status offenders. What does that mean? You can't lock up somebody for a status offense. But let's just say, for example, someone runs away continuously. You take him to court. You take him to court and the judge orders you a curfew. You stay home. Now you're home and you say, I'm not listening to what that judge has to say. I'm taking off. The parents report the violation to the courts. The child has to go back to court, and the accusation is that the child took off against the curfew orders of the court. The curfew orders of the court would be considered a probation violation. Therefore, it would be considered a criminal act, and therefore could be incarcerated for the criminal act, even though the initial offense was a status offense. What this is commonly referred to as is bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is where the original offense might be a status offense. They violate the terms of the status offense, and therefore they are charged criminally under the, like I said, the term is referred to as bootstrapping. Make sure you know that. Cases more likely to be formally processed. These are for girls because we want to make sure we're protecting them. And keep in mind, when I talk about this here, it's not like the court system doesn't like the girls. It's just the opposite. They're more, because they care about the girls more, they feel there's more of a need to protect them, and therefore they're more likely to intervene and punish the girls for their own protection. That was the philosophy there. But what kind of stigma does it have? Now girls have juvenile records because they're doing the exact same things boys did, but because the court system wants to protect the girls, we're going to give them a juvenile record. We're going to punish them more severely, because you're going to see that in the juvenile system, that girls will be punished more severely than boys. Big difference with the adult court system, because you might see adults with men being penalized more than women, but with juveniles, girls might be punished more than boys. And just like with adult offenders, you'll see that girls of color are disproportionately affected, that they're punished more severely. All right, this is the technical terms. Like I said, status offense, remember, is only an offense that is committed by as you are a juvenile. I talked about the decriminalization, that you can't put status offenders in jail. Also, another thing about the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act in 1974, which I don't have on these slides here, is that you can't lock up a juvenile and an adult in the same place. So even if a juvenile commits a criminal offense, which they can be locked up in a juvenile facility, you can't put them in with an adult facility. They have to be separated. I already got through telling you what bootstrapping is, because you're going to make sure you know these terms. I guarantee you're going to ask these on quizzes. You're going to make sure you know these terms. Bootstrapping, like I said, is the initial offense was a status offense, but because they violated the status offense, it's considered a criminal act, and therefore the bootstrapping gives the judges more authority to punish them as a delinquent instead of a status offender. And like I said before, we use, whether it's the house of refuge in the past or group homes today, we're incarcerating girls more easily because we want to protect those girls. That's the philosophy of the girls. Now, you may not agree with that philosophy. You may not agree with the court system, or you might feel that girls are being punished more unfairly because of this. But the whole concept is to protect girls, whether you agree with it or not. That girls tend to be punished more severely for their own protection. The more demands with juveniles, we're lacking resources, whether for mental health issues or rehabilitative programs. Failure of other social systems to work in harmony or to work effectively. But the irony of this here is, even though girls pose less risk to society, they're more likely to be punished. So think about that again. Girls who pose less risk to society are increasingly institutionalized. They're more likely to be locked up because, once again, we're trying to protect the girls. Girls are becoming more violent. At least we're getting more data on that. More arrests, self-reporting systems, whatever data you want to use. The argument is, are they getting more violent, or is it just the way we're reporting it? But it certainly gets more attention because, like I said before, there's a perception that girls should be sugar and spice and everything nice, not act violent, and when they do act out of their norms of behavior, the criminal justice system seems to intervene a lot quicker against the girls compared to the boys. We talk about informal or formal handling of cases. Just like I said, social service interventions by juvenile authorities can lead to formal processing. Domestic disputes between child and parents, all different ways of handling things here. Sometimes they handle outside the court system, whether it's a minor offense that turns into a major offense, or just a minor offense in itself. Sometimes it can be handled outside the court system, and sometimes if it starts off small and gets more of a significant problem, it's handled more formally. We're more likely to prosecute children under school-based violence programs, where we have zero tolerance behavior, where kids get in trouble no matter what the circumstances are, that they end up being processed formally by the schools. And sometimes these actions, because of report to the schools, sometimes because of these actions that happen in the schools, they're reported to law enforcement like school resource officers, and that actions can lead to formal court intervention. Some of the risk factors can apply to both genders, but poor family relationships, history of abuse, school performance, peer relationships, substance abuse. Not only are these factors risk factors for getting into delinquent acts, but these are all risk factors that can lead to potential incarceration. The family is a primary mechanism for socialization, and girls tend to be more attached to their families than boys. When you have a good family relationship, it can be beneficial for both boys and girls, but it seems to have more of a substantial impact, for good or bad, when it involves girls. When that social bond is destroyed, whether it's through abuse, divorce, single parents, and death in the family, when there's a disruption in the household, this can lead towards more delinquency, especially when you talk about the influence of family in girls. When the detachment of the family, for whatever reason, whether it's the structure of the family, divorce, abuse, single family homes, lack of positive role models, whatever the case may be, when that bond decreases, when there's a detachment from that family bond, which for criminology students know it as the social bond theory, when that bond decreases, the chances for delinquency increases. This can apply to both genders, but family fragmentation, divorce, family criminality, foster care, family violence, negative family attachment. These are all risk factors for female delinquents. And again, this can apply to boys as well. But when girls tend to be more attached to family than boys are, when that family unit is disrupted in whatever aspect we're talking about here, it has more of a detrimental effect on girls compared to boys. The last bullet is sexual, physical, and emotional abuse have long been documented as significant risk factors for female offenders. In fact, when we talk about incarceration later on in the semester, hopefully we'll be in the classroom, but in the meantime, you're going to see that a lot of female offenders were especially sexual abuse victims as a child, and their sexual abuse as a child leads to female delinquency, if not female as a woman offender. The irony of status offenses is how many kids get into trouble by running away and because they're just trying to escape a violent household only to find themselves in some type of violent situation, whether it's being a trafficking victim or something else. It's also learned behavior for girls. Girls who were sexually abused during their childhood learn to tolerate that behavior, and sometimes they end up being in domestic violent relationships in the future because it's a way of life for them. This applies to boys as well, but girls who are particularly more likely to be victims of sexual abuse can have the significant impact on relationships later on in life. As it says here, while boys and girls can exhibit many of the same risk factors for delinquency, such as family dysfunction, school failures, poor relationships, so forth and so on, as you can all read that there, the effects of these resonate stronger for girls. As I said, over and over and over, girls are more attached, and when that is broken down, the detrimental effects of the family unit deteriorating have more an effect on the female versus the male. All right. Sexual, physical, and emotional abuse are significant risk factors for delinquency. And again, girls are more likely to be sexually abused. Physical abuse and emotional abuse are pretty similar between boys and girls, but all three factors can lead towards delinquency. But keep in mind how sexual abuse is predominantly against girls, and any one of these factors, if it breaks up the family tie or that family attachment, it leads towards delinquencies. Girls overall have a higher rate of abuse, so they're more subjected to risk factors for delinquency. However, as we know, if we look at the statistics, boys commit the majority of delinquent acts. And here's your list of how abuse can occur. Running away, trust issues. I'm sorry, not occur. What are some of the results of being a victim of abuse? Run away from home, don't trust. If you can't trust your parents, pretty bad, right? You lose that bond, the emotional attachment with anyone. You engage in risky behaviors. How many girls, especially girls of neglect, how many girls who are neglected and get involved with risky sexual behaviors just to garnish attention? All these type of actions only lead to future victimization by others, and particularly how many girls are easily targeted from running away and becoming victims of human trafficking. How many children are missing? This is not broken down by gender, but I want you to make sure you know this for testing purposes. The vast majority of children who are missing because they ran away, followed by family abductions, and the least likely is stranger abductions, non-family member abductions or stranger abductions. That category of 58,000, This is what gets all the attention, what creates all the stir, the parent's worst nightmare. But in reality, most children who run away, most children who are missing because they ran away, and followed second, and it's not even a close second, by family abductions, and that's usually because of custody battles. And the third is the least common, and that's because of it's children who are abducted by strangers or non-family members. Other factors: who you hang out with, differential association, how much free time you have, your age, who you associate with, older adolescents of the opposite sex, no family attachment. These are all factors that lead towards female delinquency. Girls who fail in school are more likely to get involved with trouble with the law. Some schools are like a war zone, where some urban environments where whether it's girls or boys, it's just a hostile environment that learning is not conducive for anyone, more likely to lead towards delinquent acts. If they can't succeed in school, they don't have an attachment to school, they don't have a desire to go to college, then these acts itself can lead towards delinquent behavior as well. And again, like I said before, how the positive involvement of parents as a protective factor. If the parents are involved with the schoolwork or get involved with the kids succeeding in school, then they're less likely to get involved with delinquent acts. These are all factors for risk factors. So and again, what's ironic about all this is all these risk factors can apply to both boys and girls, and even though it's more of a risk for girls, boys still commit most of the offenses, even though the risks seem to affect girls greater. Substance abuse, I can't stress enough. Substance abuse is a big factor with juvenile delinquency, especially if your parents are using drugs or alcohol. Boys are more likely to experiment with drugs earlier than girls, but if girls get involved with drugs, they're more likely to get addicted. Other aspects here: social opportunities, poor self-concept. How many people get involved with drugs because they can't cope with life's events? Creation of other problem behaviors. These are all risk factors associated with substance abuse or child abuse. How many girls get involved with multiple drugs? How many crimes associated with drugs? How many girls run away if there's substance abuse in the household? How many girls involved in substance abuse to self-medicate? Why is this so significant? Because girls take drugs for different reasons compared to boys. Boys might take it for excitement, girls might take it to self-medicate, but again, girls are more likely to become addicted to drugs. So keep this in mind between the boys and the girls with substance abuse. Boys are more likely to get involved with drugs at an earlier age. But when girls get involved with drugs, they're more likely to become addicted because they get involved with drugs for different reasons compared to that of boys. Some of the mental health factors associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal tendencies, other mental health disorders. How many girls are put in detention and only exacerbate the mental health issues that they already have? Because they're already having mental health issues, the court system, in their concept of protecting the child, put them in incarceration for their best interest and only exacerbate the mental health issues that they already had. And these are some of the recommendations to meet the unique needs of delinquent girls. And it's pretty self-explanatory here. And I'm going to skip this last slide. I'm not going to ask you anything on this particular slide, but let me just say this here. This concludes our first lecture online for juvenile delinquency. You will have a quiz right at the end of this lecture. So good luck, and I hope you enjoyed our first lecture on juvenile delinquency online. And like I said, be patient with me, as this is a completely new experience for me as well.